Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. So happy to welcome you to DCM's webinar today. Dennis, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Yvonne. Glad you could all be here with us today. I'm so proud of my colleague and friend, Yvonne Styles. Yvonne is an executive vice president of our firm. She's obviously got 20 years of experience, but doesn't look it. Born yesterday as a C-suite executive, has done decades of work in mental and behavioral health care, children and family services. She's been very successful dealing with marginalized communities at their level of need. She's very focused in on inclusive practice that are at the heart of leadership development and competence. She works with hundreds of organizations. She's also the CEO of Styles Behavioral Services and has a PhD in development, master's degree in human and organizational systems. And I turn the rest over to Yvonne. This presentation will be recorded, so everybody will be receiving the recording as well as the PowerPoint. So Yvonne, you're all set.
Thank you, Dennis, and welcome once again, everyone. I'm going to do my best to be as interactive as possible, but I'm hosting, and so this is what you would call a one-trick pony show. So I may have to admit people as I'm talking, so please bear with me if I seem distracted at points. So first of all, I've asked that everyone drop in the chat room where you're dialing in from, and later on in the session, if we can, we'll have a little bit of a dialogue, or at least I'll try to answer some questions. But I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint in a moment and we'll get started. So I want to thank my colleague Dennis for the warm introduction. I will also tell you a little bit about myself as we begin. Okay, so I don't know if this is going to work, Dennis. I think I have to give it back to you because the sharing is not going to allow me to let people in. Dennis, can you hear me? Anyway, okay, let's go. So welcome to DEI Plus, Building a Culture of Inclusion. Again, I'm the Executive Vice President at DCM. And, you know, my preferred pronouns are she and her. I have multiple identities. I'm a mom, I'm a teacher, I'm an executive. And that'll play a larger role as we talk later about intersectional identities. So as Dennis mentioned to you, I spent a lot of my career working with people, trying to solve the very real problems in individual lives. Worked with children and families. I've studied organizational systems, and as a result have become very concerned about structural inequalities. I've worked through lots of organizational plans and development strategies. So I would say as a person experienced in leadership development, a person who's worked at the C-suite level, I have a vested interest in solving these very real human problems of the day. So for me, being a capacity builder in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging space allows my specialization in consulting and training to really be useful and to be of service. I hope that I'm leveraging my knowledge and experience to empower today's leaders. And I think my lived experience, it was the starting point for this passion I have for social justice and equitable practices in the workplace. Undergirding everything for me is my optimism and my belief in humans' innovative potential to shape their own destiny. So with that, I will now talk about today's webinar objectives. I'd like for us to leave this webinar with an ability to explore culture building as a leadership competency. Some of you are already at the level of leadership, senior leadership. Some of you are aspiring leaders, and some of you are informal leaders. But building culture is not the domain of one person. It really is all of us should take responsibility in creating culture. I'd also like to ensure that we can develop frameworks for inclusive practices. And I'd like to explore a strategy that will enable you to build cultures of belonging in your respective workplaces. So those are the goals for today. So I wanted to set the stage because right now there's an awful lot of talk. Sorry if you can see my screen. An awful lot of talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some of it is meaningful and some of it is rhetorical. But what I would say is that we want to distinguish between real strategies for improving workplace experiences and the rhetoric around what we'd like to call woke washing. And that's a term that I use when discussing organizations that may claim a commitment to diversity and inclusion and a commitment to dismantling structural inequality, but somehow their actual practices do not yield meaningful change. So I hope that those of you who are here today are really committed to doing this work, that have an investment in seeing realistic outcomes. And so that's who I'm hoping to engage today. So this poem, I'm going to take a minute to share with you something that I've found very inspiring. This is a poem by poet David White, and he's wrote this recently in the last few years, I think it was. So the poem reads, "This is the bright home in which I live. This is where I ask my friends to come. This is where I want to love all the things it has taken me so long to learn to love. This is the temple of my adult aloneness, and I belong to that aloneness as I belong to my life. There is no house like the house of belonging." So you make of it what you will. It spoke to me because there was the juxtaposition of loneliness and connection. And I think that's the space that we try to navigate. So belonging, to just put some shape to what we're talking about here, is a feeling of community with the people and environments that make us feel connected. You know, of course, gives us, I want to take a pause and also define some of the other terms I'm using. When we talk about diversity, we're talking about the representation, the representation of different and unique identities, characteristics, experiences, and perspectives. Equity is giving everyone what they need to succeed by increasing access, resources, and opportunities for all, especially for those who are underrepresented and have been historically disadvantaged. And inclusion is a welcoming culture in which differences are celebrated and everyone is valued, respected, and able to reach their full potential. And as you can see, I use these lines to show the connection and the interdependence of all of these terms. When we think about DEI and B strategies, each one of these blocks are an important component that we should be mindful of. But today we're going to focus mostly on belonging. One of the things I wanted to lift up and elevate is the idea of psychological safety. And it's a key factor in high performance teams. Building a culture of belonging begins with an unconditional regard and acceptance of each other, and some would say acceptance of oneself. So this, before we can talk about belonging, we have to talk about creating spaces that have psychological safety. I guess the clinician in me is always going to want to highlight that as a key factor in any organizational strategy. Some other important concepts I thought would help us as we have this dialogue is to talk about power, because these are implicit components of psychological safety. Power, the ability to control others, events or resources to make happen what one wants to happen in spite of obstacles, resistance, or opposition. Privilege, of course, is the exclusive access or access to material or immaterial resources based on membership to a dominant social group. And of course, this implicit bias. This is an unconscious favoritism toward or prejudice against people of a particular ethnicity, gender, or social group that influences one's actions or perceptions. So you can see why these terms are relevant and important when we start talking about creating psychological safety. And by the way, we all have implicit biases. And that's why we do this kind of work, capacity building, so we can awaken to, first of all, our own biases before we engage in organizational strategies to make change at the workplace. So I talked a little bit about equity before, but I thought this visualization would be helpful because I talk about structural inequality, but I want to lift up and elevate equity, because when we talk about the workplace, that's what we're really talking about, is equity. And how can we make sure that everyone gets what they need to feel a part of, to also contribute to, and to also be able to be embraced by. So equity for underrepresented groups is really an important component. So please keep that in mind, bracket that as we have this discussion today. So why does inclusion matter? Employees experiencing low inclusion are 6 times more likely to actively pursue new jobs. And the reason why this is important is this phenomena in the post-COVID world of quiet quitting. I know you've heard that. And also the Great Resignation. A deeper dive into some of the data suggests that a lot of these are folks who have never felt a part of, people who have been working, kind of holding back their dismay or their feeling of disconnect, and reaching a point in time now where they're not willing to just go along to get along anymore. Sorry. So this inclusion matters because retention matters. You know, creating a welcoming culture in which differences are celebrated and everyone is valued, respected, and able to reach their full potential. Most employers would say that that's their goal. So having an inclusion strategy is where a lot of organizations fail to hit the mark. So first, we have to be able to ask the right questions. An excluded employee is 50%, has a 50% higher turnover rate than those who feel included. I just want to highlight my multitasking here, people. This is very challenging. Anyway, you see my unhappy friend here. She's representing people who don't feel like they belong. The net impact to organizations who have at least 10,000 employees is up to $10 million annually. So I think it's in employers and organizations' best interest to create environments where they can maximize their retention of employees. So in other words, having a strategy for belonging is a crucial piece for any DEI strategy. If you haven't already, we really recommend that you define your organization's why. Why is DEI and B important to you all? What are your values? Do your employees know what they are? Do you have a shared understanding of what the organization values? So I think that's the starting point in this dialogue, is to define and refine your organization's why. You know, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging strategies have most likely been situated in the human resource area of organizations. We suggest at DCM that you position your DEI and B strategy at the senior level of your leadership. Your executive leadership team should consider this part of their strategic goals. And just like every other strategic goal, they should be SMART goals. In other words, they should be specific, articulated, they should be measurable, they should be aggressive, realistic, and time-bound. And what do I mean by that? I mean an honest and rigorous analysis of where your organizational diversity strategy is currently should be rigorously discussed and reviewed and assessed, and engaging all levels of your organization, create goals that speak to your optimum or most desired organizational staffing. So SMART goals are really important. It should be part of your discussions around DEI and B. And, you know, if you're not clear on how to do that, then consultation with organizations like DCM is a good place to start. I wanted to just elevate these articles and suggest that you read them. You know, the Harvard Business Review and Forbes, they spent a lot of ink talking about belonging now. So it's not just Dr. Styles or DCM who thinks this is an important elevation of DEI component. This is really the evolution of an idea. And belonging has become so crucial to understanding how to retain staff, how to attract staff, and how to be successful in building culture. So maximizing retention, performance, innovation, and creativity. You know, diversity and inclusion have always been impactful. These ideas are impacting your organization now. The challenge is we formerly understood these as compliance issues, but now with a new lens, we have to look at them more from a culture place. And of course, productivity is enhanced and impacted by a culture of inclusion. You know, I don't want to be too gauche here, but there's a saying, if you want a happy, well, on my refrigerator used to be a saying, if mommy's not happy, nobody's happy. So take that for what you will. But I wanted to just elevate this idea that this is not new. Our way of understanding it has evolved, but this is not really new ideas. We're framing it in a way that makes it accessible for everyone to be involved in creating the kind of ideal workplace that they want to have. So attraction matters. Having an inclusive organization makes it easier to attract talent, and it helps you retain talent. And that's true across all demographics. There's a new phrase called the boomerang. And I don't know if any of you have heard that term yet, but the boomerang is folks that have previously worked at a place and decided to come back. And that's only possible if they have a positive or favorable experience in that workplace. So I guess the takeaway is that creating a culture of belonging has really infinite impact on your ability to attract talent over time. So it really is in your best interest to consider that as you look at DEI and B strategies. And another reason why it matters is that research has found that people in more inclusive organizations are much more likely to feel free to innovate and to feel comfortable challenging the status quo. And so we don't want to be in an environment where folks are just going along to get along. We want to create workplaces where people are really challenging, not only themselves, but challenging each other to create more innovation. If some of you are in the nonprofit sector, of course, we want innovation there. We want people who have a connection to the mission, to think outside the box and to join your efforts in mission fulfillment. And if you're in the for-profit sector, needless to say, the bottom line is impacted by having an engaged employee or staff and also constituency. So I think I've made the case sufficiently that inclusion matters. It affects your bottom line. It affects your employee retention, and it affects your own experience day to day in the workplace. So now I want to talk a little bit about leadership skills and inclusive practice as a leadership competency. So leaders do more than just direct or give directions or set goals and milestones. Leaders create culture, whether they mean to inadvertently or whether it's intentional. So I want to posit that the leaders should have an inclusive vision. It starts with the leadership, having an inclusive vision of the organization. And leaders should have their own why. They should have their own, they should be evolved enough to articulate their own reasons for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And leaders hopefully can use the power of language and storytelling to animate the staff and board members toward clearly defined DEI and B goals. Again, leaders should be able to articulate their policies, but it also requires leaders to honestly assess the culture and its inclusivity regularly. It shouldn't be a one and done. It should be a routine way to take the temperature of your organization and provide a means for your employees to give you feedback. We recommend the 360. There's many different ways that you can get feedback, but we really want to urge leadership to encourage healthy conversations around organizational culture and buy-in. In order to be successful in creating workplace culture, leaders need to inspire people. One of the most inspirational things for most of us is storytelling. So, for me, I have my own story of growing up. I was frequently the only one that looked like me in my environments, my early education. And I, had to learn to think outside the box in order to create connection. That shaped me. And it's always been a place that I return to. Wherever I'm in a social environment, a work environment, I always look to see who's the person that's not quite feeling connected. So reaching across difference is something that I learned to do very early. That's my story, but I encourage each of you to have your story, to own your story, to share your story. And if you're a leader, telling your story has resonance in your culture, and it has the ability to inspire people to act. And we know that once inspired, the motivation for others to act becomes very personal. If you share your story, it then becomes a part of another person's story by connecting with you. So I don't want to glaze over that as a key way to build culture. Transparency is really what I'm talking about, and authenticity. So what I would like to posit here is what I call the 3A approach, the 3A's for culture building. One is to audit, two is to assign, and three is to articulate. So what do I mean by that? When we're talking about auditing, I'm suggesting that you do a rigorous assessment of your existing culture. That's discussions at the leadership level. That may be a survey that you disseminate. It may be interviews. You can design any way that fits with your organization to assess what is happening now. How are people feeling? Because you cannot make change if you don't understand where you're situated presently. The one thing about the audit is also appreciating intersectionality. So what I mean by that is many people have multiple identities. And so you have to have a wide lens when you're assessing your culture. Including a 360 assessment is probably the most a confidential 360 assessment. It's probably one of the most effective ways to gather data. And another way is to observe and engage in, like I said, small conversations, focus groups. Let's ask the tough questions and have the what I call messy conversations. And the one thing I want to talk about here, again, is the vigorous self-reflection. I think I invite all of you, when you're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, we all have to look at ourselves and we have to reflect on what our true feelings are around this. Is it something that you engage with because you think it's the right thing, or it's kind of, what people expect you to do, or is it something that you have a real belief and commitment in? If you want to make progress in your DEI goals, you're going to need to have evidence-based data and on which to build your organizational plan. So I really want to encourage you to create this auditing process and make it an iterative process, using this at intervals so that you can create a culture that's reflective. In order to make change, we have to reflect. I hope that makes sense. And when I finish the presentation slides, hopefully we can dialogue a little bit about some of this. So here's the revolutionary piece to me, is the assign. Who carries the intention forward in your organization? We posit that multiple levels of participation is required. There are leaders and there are formal leaders and informal leaders. There are assigned leaders and emergent leaders. So in your organization, who are the leaders? And, the young folks call them influencers. I know you have them in your organization. They may not have titles, they may not be leaders, but they have impact. And so one of the ways you build buy-in is to maybe not give it to someone as a work assignment, but to engage people at the very human level of buy-in. This is one of the most assured ways that you can make change in your culture, is having community buy-in. So I really want to encourage leaders to tell their story, share their story, and engage both informal leaders and influences within your culture already. And then once you have your ideas about where you need to go and what you need to do, let's articulate that. Make it into a policy and a so-called mission statement for your organization. We have to be transparent about culture issues, because people may not say it, but they feel it. People are experiencing the culture. So let's be transparent. Truth telling goes back to the earlier point I made about psychological safety. Do people feel safe enough to tell you how it really feels to be there? Um, this is a key component for gathering buy-in and data. People need to feel safe enough to tell the truth about what they feel, what they see, and what they want. And then again, for leaders, your behavior should match your intention. We all have heard the adage that action speaks louder than words. I don't care how much you talk about your respect for people or your commitment to diversity. If people see you all the time with a certain selection of people that's not embracing diversity across lines of difference in your organization, folks are just not going to buy that you have a commitment. So it's not enough to just put forth a mission statement around diversity. I think we all have to get real with our behavior, and we have to reflect our values in our behavior. And the last thing I'll say on this topic is after you articulate, I think you have to verbalize appreciation for what is happening organically. When I mentioned earlier the informal leaders and the influencers, let's bring them into awareness and appreciate that there are some people that are always building culture. I grew up with a mom who was from the South. She was always creating community. She couldn't help herself. That's what she did. And so I hope that you can recognize those people in your organization who are similarly doing things that create culture and sustain culture. Presently, please assess your teams for diversity. And in your best effort, your team should represent difference. They have different qualities, characteristics, experiences, and perspectives. And that's one of the most assured ways to get maximum creativity and productivity in your teams. So please be rigorous in your assessment of your teams. Employees show a 50%, 56% increase in job performance when they feel like they belong. And this results in a gain of about 52 million per year for every 10,000 employees. Now, obviously, these statistics come from bigger corporations. I don't know if some of you are representing more community-based organizations or smaller nonprofits or smaller businesses, but you get the idea that the bottom line, the net impact of having teams that feel like they belong has a monetary impact on your organization and your mission. So again, belonging is so crucial. When people ask what it feels like, when employees were asked in a longitudinal study what it felt like, they all, to a person, reported it felt like being treated with dignity. So, no one wants to be invisible. And I think it's incumbent on leaders and managers to figure out how everyone can feel a part of your workplace. I like this graphic of children. And if you ever want to see how diversity or inclusion should work, watch children on the playground when they're young, before they've been socialized too much. They embrace each other across difference. They can teach us. So that is pretty much my formal presentation. I'm hoping we can have a organized discussion. I just wanted to highlight these two books that I think are very influential. Again, you will receive the PowerPoint and you'll be able to get them from my slides, but Brene Brown doing a podcast on Unlocking Us, and this book here, Inclusion on Purpose. And then for those of you who haven't read this book, I really strongly endorse this book. I wrote here backstory because details matter. How did we arrive at a place where people were highlighting difference all the time? Isabella Wilkerson takes us through the origins of divisions amongst people, and I think is very helpful. And here's yet another book on race, work, and leadership. And this is perspectives. It helped me a great deal, perspectives on the Black experience for leadership. So, and how to reach me. I have, as Dennis mentioned earlier, my consulting and coaching practice at Styles Behavioral Services and DCM, where we do executive search, nonprofit leadership and board. Oh, Tamara, I can hear you. So there you have it. Now,
Yvonne, hi,
yeah.
Yvonne.
Hi.
First of all, fabulous. One question came up from Krisha about the 360 assessment. You want to talk about that? You want me to talk about that?
You can talk about that, Dennis, while I try to look at who's not muted. Someone getting feedback from. So go ahead.
I'm just looking at the chat box. Okay. We have a tool. 360 tool is one when you are helping people to develop themselves. This is about developing, not punishing or reprimanding. When you can have an annual evaluation of somebody about whether they met their goals and objectives, but it doesn't always include feedback as to how they have dealt with teamwork, communications, resourcefulness, initiative, etc. So our 360 tool, which is very, very affordable, it's on our website. It's about $350. It includes feedback for up to 15 direct reports and yourself, or even a board. So it's a great tool to look at, so you can get a sense of, how well where am I at and how do people perceive me? And so where do I need to develop myself as a leader? So I really recommend taking a look at our website, again, DennisCMiller.com. Look at our Institute for Transformational Nonprofit Leadership and Board Performance. We have plenty of tools there. We also have a reference library for a lot of free information, a lot of previous webinars, articles, and blogs, and I hope you'll take advantage of that. And I'm going to turn it back to my friend Yvonne.
Okay, and then I wanted to also say that there are 360s that are designed uniquely for your organization. If we were to do a diversity, equity, and inclusion audit of an organization, those are more individualized survey tools that would be developed. And we get feedback from multiple levels of your organization. And that would be a qualitative study so that we could assess what your needs are and where you are in terms of your DEI and B strategy. So I hope that answers the question. So now I guess if you have any questions and you want to drop it in you're welcome, Nate or Nat. If you want to drop them in the chat box, we can have a dialogue. But I guess I wanted to hear from anyone that feels like they are already moving in this space, creating belonging, and some of the innovations that you've used, if anybody wants to share. I think if you just drop your name in the chat, I can unmute you.
Feel free to speak up, unmute yourself, but
okay, Jessica, let's see. Jessica.
Is that working?
Yes, that's working.
So I have a question. Majority of my agency is predominantly African-American women. And so clearly we want to bring in more men and other cultures, but the city that we reside in is also predominantly African-American. And so whenever we talk about how can we be more diverse, everybody gets very confused because they're like, well, I don't know what we can do. And so I'm just curious, what do you do in situations where majority of the agency and community is of one particular demographic?
Well, diversity is a very multifaceted term. There's diversity within groups, and there's no homogeneity in any group. And the other thing is, you talk about neurodiversity. So everyone's ability is very different. So I think as a leader, Jessica, I would encourage you to elevate the discussion just out of race. And that's one of the quandaries that I face all the time. When I'm talking about diversity, most people think it's a black and white thing. It's like they don't even include other groups. And it's very limiting. It's very, very limiting. We must do capacity building so that people understand that diversity is about all the many different ways that we occur as human beings. And just because someone has a similar complexion does not mean that they're anything like me, So let's not limit our conversation. When we talk about diversity, Jessica, you can talk about age, you can talk about neurodiversity, you can talk about religion, you can talk about geographic diversity. I was doing a session with an organization, and part of the staff is on the West Coast and the other part is on the East Coast, and how they show up and work is completely different. So diversity, in the most broad sense, let's understand that it doesn't define us just strictly by one component. I hope that answers your question.
It did. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anybody else? And if anybody feels like they've nailed it and they got it and they're, can teach me something, I'm waiting to hear. Anyone?
This Philip has a question, I think. Philip Payne.
Hey, Philip Payne, unmute yourself.
Hi, you had me at we have to distinguish between real diversity and woke washing. I'm battling that a whole lot right now. I work for a company and it does wonderful work in the community. I'm not trying to bash the organization as a whole or in general, but one of the things we're battling right now is there's this push. Well, our employee numbers have to look like our community, but we're spread across like urban communities and rural communities and what have you, and that's very different. And there's growing populations in some areas where before there was a very small Hispanic population, now it's getting bigger. I live in an area where the Jewish population is growing really quickly, and I'm trying to get some of the higher ups to understand that, yes, we need to recognize cultural trauma from, and no offense to anybody here, but from the African-American community. Yes, we need to recognize that, and we need to acknowledge what has happened, and we need to take every possible step to correct those things. But there was a big thing sent out the other day, and the title of it on the email was just talking about cultural trauma. And a bunch of us opened it and we're like, well, this is interesting and this is great, but this is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I actually said something to one of the vice presidents and he said, there's a Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Wow. Okay.
And so as a Jewish person, I looked at that and I was like, yeah, this needs to be addressed. But the more I tried to talk to him about it, the more he just kind of shut down. So my question would be, how do you fight that? What is not even to fight it, how do you start that conversation in a way that somebody is more likely to hear, because nobody is hearing what I'm saying?
Well, Philip, I appreciate what your dilemma is. And we live in a culture where people are very reductionistic. People just want to get the sound bite from everything. But your challenge, I think, is to build a coalition. I think I talked about that, to share with peers, identify maybe some other stakeholders who can help you carry forth the message. And so when you're talking about culture change, not any one of us can do it by ourselves. So I want to encourage you to expand your coalition and expand buy-in. And then it's a daily engagement around these issues of difference. people are afraid to acknowledge difference. When people say, oh, we're all the same, I love everybody. That's just a way to avoid having what I called earlier messy conversations. Difference can be celebrated. It can be, but we have to get there. So, Philip, I know it's a challenge. You said the higher ups. I know it's not just your decision to make by yourself, but without getting too far into the weeds, I just would encourage you to get buy-in, maybe form a committee, a culture committee, or an informal one if you can't do a formal one, and think about strategies for the long term, not just 1 or 2 conversations or 1 or 2 days, but to, I'll make the analogy like Holocaust Remembrance Day. Are you kidding me? It's an annual momentary remembrance. We
Right.
should be talking about it all the time. And so I just want to encourage you to, enlist support from your peers and maybe someone at the leadership level, and think about it strategically. I don't want to give you any, quick answers, but it's a serious thing to engage with. It's a serious idea to build around, and it's worthwhile. It really does make change beyond your tenure at this organization. So that's what I would say.
Yvonne?
you.
Okay, Yvonne, hi. Lisa Lawson has a comment. And Lisa, I was wondering if you could unmute yourself and talk about what you've done with motivational interviewing. Is that possible, Lisa?
Sure. And I apologize, everyone. I'm sick. So if I cough through this, I apologize.
Thank you for coming, Lisa.
Oh, hi. I would never miss one of Dennis's webinars. These are fantastic. Thank you all. So I fully agree with everything you've said in the presentation. One of the things that our agency did was after the tragic death of George Floyd, we took a real examination of our DEI policies, and we completely reinvigorated our DEI committee to address what is not just wanted for, the standards of our programs, but also what's actually needed by our employees for both their retention and their safety in the environment. And that has had such an incredible impact. So, and I know I responded to someone else privately about how to do a DEI survey, but one of the things that's really helped us is when talking to leadership is using motivational interviewing. And for those of you who don't have a background in that, I'll share my email address. I'm happy to share some free resources on motivational interviewing. But essentially what you're doing is when you're trying to engage in and I don't want to spend too much time on this, when you're trying to engage someone in a conversation, don't just think about what you want to get out of that conversation. Think about what they need and they want out of that conversation. So if the goal of an agency is to spend less money, bring in more units, drive outcomes, and remain sustainable, then that's kind of how you have to gear your presentation. And so that in itself tells you that their intrinsic motivation is that not that they don't want to discuss, the topics of observing Jewish holidays, or as someone mentioned, I think it was January 27th was Holocaust Remembrance Day, which Catholic Charities did celebrate recently and acknowledge and observe, but also tying it in with how that fits in with the strategy of the agency so that we have the bandwidth to do that, and creating a language that works for your leadership. In a way, you're kind of giving them the toolkit to say yes to you. So I always encourage using motivational interviewing, and like the old saying, consider walking in the moccasins of the other person, right? So, or walking in other person's shoes, and you'll get much more buy-in from the other party, whether it's your leadership or your team. But I wholeheartedly agree with Yvonne that having your people with you, having that community with similar ideals, a DEI committee or even a work group that's established for short-term DEI goals, while that's kind of a band-aid on a bigger issue, is better than nothing. So bring your numbers, bring your data, and always speak from the perspective of the other. And that's the 3 good ways to kind of bring in leadership so that they can support you, and obviously keep attending these webinars, because that's where I got all these ideas from over the years. But I mean, honestly, thanks all. And I'll leave my email if anyone wants free MI materials. I'll email them over. And I know I owe somebody our DEI survey at work, so I'll send those too. Sorry.
Wow, Lisa, thank you so much. That is so well said. And, when we have more time, maybe we should talk about ways to engage people. Maybe that's a webinar, Dennis.
There you go. Sounds like an April one. Sounds like April showers.
But anyway, Lisa, well said. And you know, the thing is, this is a community problem. What we're doing is really trying to change society through changing the workplace. And this is really what my passion is all about. So forming coalitions across multiple lines of the organization and, you know, like I said, informal and formal leadership and influencers, that's how things change. And I want to talk about someone who's talked about they had an advisory. Jeanette said that in her agency, they developed an advisory council to help with justice, equity.
Yes.
Hi, you want to tell us about it?
Hi, yes, I am, Yvonne. How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Put myself on here. So I am in the wonderful state of New York. Yay! You know, and I am the director of diversity and inclusion at the State Office of Addiction Services and Supports.
Wow.
So our commissioner, Dr. Shanazo Cunningham, created a new division in this agency. And we call ourselves JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion.
Love it.
May the force be with you. And what we decided to do, so our equity officer is Carmelita Cruz. So myself and Carmelita are the JEDI office right now. We are trying to hire more staff. Because it's similar to something that Lisa said, you know, especially in state government, we have a lot of rules and regulations that were built to, once again, one size fits all, and it doesn't. You know, what may help serve one population is not going to serve another. So what might serve a white population doesn't serve an indigenous population,
right,
or an African population, or a Latino population. So we created this advisory council. We sent out a form. We asked for volunteers. Now, the importance of this being volunteers in your agency is that they are not handpicked by executive team. So this isn't, you know, you can have support from the executive, but the voices need to be the audience of the people that are being impacted in your agency, that have not been heard as much. So we have about 32 members in our advisory council. We made it clear that we did not want members of the executive team on this council, that we wanted it to be volunteered. And our commissioner supported that. And so when we work on, right now, we have a vendor that we actually hired, Health Justice. The sister that runs it is Oni Blackstock. And she's doing an assessment for our agency. She's been talking to the leadership about their roles, you know, the executive team members in their divisions, and asking them questions. And now we're getting ready to roll out a survey to the entire agency with questions. So, because we need data.
That's
you know,
right.
At the end of the day, we need to know if we're talking about X percentage isn't working for us, we need to know what that percentage is. If we're going to change policy, rules, and regulations, we need to know what our staff thinks is most impacted in what areas. So I would tell you there's been pushback from leadership, of course, because like you said, you know, Yvonne, these are tough conversations to have. And people also have certain perceptions that they won't let go of.
That's right.
You know, so, but they must be had, you know, and it's not like we're trying to tear everything down, but we're trying to recreate a more equitable environment for the people that we serve.
That's right.
You know, equal doesn't equal equity.
That's right. That's
you
right.
know, so I'm encouraged that we have this advisory council that we have, and it's very diverse. That again, it wasn't handpicked by leadership, that these individuals said this work is important to me in our agency, and we want to work with the equity officer, we want to work with our DEI director to get the work done. Now, what the assessment right now is in the beginning stages. Once we get the survey out, we're hoping to get all our employees to answer this 15-minute survey. It will be anonymous, it will be confidential, because we understand that fear is there when you're having these conversations. But we can't let fear stop us. It didn't stop in the civil rights. It didn't stop in a lot of other places,
That's
you
right.
know. So I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged for state government, at least in the state of New York, that, you know, and one of the things that the commissioner has said to all of our providers is, you know, before we can give you guidance on how to utilize these tools and talk about equity and talk about inclusion, we have to clean our house first. So that's what we're doing right now.
Jeanette, listen, thank you so much. I think your comments are terrific. Someone wants to ask a follow-up question. So Tricia Morris, you want to jump in here, please?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm not really wanting to ask a question. Came in a little bit late due to another meeting, but I thought this could add some value. You know, I'm fortunate to be a part of a division that, you know, DEI is definitely practiced, but my role also includes being a part of community meetings where that's not practiced as much, but I'm realizing that I have to be the change that I want to see. And I thought it was interesting, just last week, I was in a meeting and we had not met, we did not meet. This is our first time meeting this year. We normally have a meeting in January, but things didn't occur that way. This was our first meeting, and I remember the facilitator expressed, she was going around the room and she was saying, okay, I'm going to be calling everybody, let me know what's new, what's going on, you know, because there are other new people on this panel. And so I started off by simply stating that, you know, it's Black, I just want to acknowledge that it is Black History Month. And I expressed the fact that, you know, James McHugh Smith, I understood, just learned that he was the first African-American to practice in the US as a medical doctor. And it was just so small, but it was so interesting. I thought I was the only a Black person on the call. And then as soon as I said that, the other one Black person came off of video and showed her face. It's as if she was like, I'm not alone. And I thought, that's interesting. And it was small, but I felt like for her, it was like, I'm included, you know, because nothing else was said about Black History Month until I said it. And it was just really interesting. So sometimes it's small things that makes a difference.
Tricia, thank you so much. Yvonne, we have one final question, and then we got to wrap this up here.
Okay, I
Sadie?
just want to say to Tricia, it is always small things that make the big difference. That's what I spent a little time talking about, you know, each person having their story and reaching across difference to build coalition. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, good point. All right, Sadie, you want to ask your question about Jeanette's comments about the leadership?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Sadie. It was great to see that Jeanette is coming from state government because I'm actually in county government over on the West Coast in the state of Oregon.
Oh,
yeah, so it's actually, I've been going to a lot of these DEI belonging inclusion webinars, and I do sometimes find it challenging to see how it relates to governmental agencies, especially coming from an area. I mean, Oregon is a really white state, but my community is particularly white and conservative. But something I want to do is establish an equity committee, and I have expressed concerns about not letting management be on the committee due to, you know, power dynamics. I want staff to feel like they have a safe space to be open and honest about things that they experience or they see, but management is worried about a possible breakdown in communication. Like they feel like if management is not on the committee, it is actually providing more of that barrier to having more like meaningful and collaborative conversations. And so I was just wondering what your perspective or anyone's perspective is on, you know, having management on these types of committees and not.
So I would say, Sadie, for us, so one again, to reiterate, and this is a new commissioner we've had. I've been here with I've worked for 4 governors. I'm an appointee in a lot of different roles. So I've had 20 years in state government. So our commissioner basically decided to create this division. I would say if the county creates a division, whoever is managing that division, there's your leadership. So you don't need a deputy from the county sitting on the council. You're the leadership. So Carmelita Cruz, who's our equity officer, she is on the executive team, and she and I manage the advisory council. But we don't dictate. The difference is we didn't want, our associate commissioner of prevention, our associate commissioner of treatment, we didn't want those individuals as part of the team because it takes away from the voices that we need to hear from. We are not the voices that we need to hear from. It is our staff. It is the boots on the ground. It's our finance people. It's our treatment people. They are the ones that are doing, the layman's work. Now, from a management perspective, I would say to you, I'm on the team, Carm's on the team. We don't dictate to the team. If you have too many executive team members, then it becomes, like they are the ones managing the process and you take away the voice.
Yeah.
So I would say if you create a division at a county level, I know counties have chief diversity officers. Like I said, we call our division Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, JEDI for short. Whatever you want to call it, whoever is managing that is the manager. So I would come back to the executive and say, but I am the executive here.
That's right.
And it's not like you're not going to talk to them. It's not like we're not discussing these things with them, but they are the ones making the choices and decisions for us.
Right.
Let me just jump in for a second. Sadie and Jeanette, this is fabulous. I'm going to give you, I know we're going to run, we're going to give you an example.
Mhm.
It has nothing to do with DEI, but.
But Dennis, let me address something here.
Sure,
that's
please, go ahead. Of course.
relevant. Sadie, it's important that you don't allow that to be a barrier to the work. So please understand when I talked about messy conversation and empowering people, as long as you all can create the charter for your committee or your advisory group and how you operate, just like Jeanette said, it's not a management thing. It's about voices coming together with equal weight to solve an organizational dilemma or objective. So as long as you can codify how you work together, don't allow that to be a barrier to moving forward. So this work is incremental and it's far reaching. So the main thing is to get it going and keep it going. And it's your vision and you getting buy-in from your colleagues that's going to matter most. Okay?
And Yvonne is right, Sadie. And don't let the executive make that an excuse. Push back. That is not a reason.
Okay.
That's just a way for them not to move forward.
A
Okay.
good leader, Sadie, a good leader will encourage you to do this without their being on the committee.
Mhm.
I know we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to give you a small example that you might relate to this. Oh, is it okay, Yvonne? Last second? Okay.
Well, I just think we should release the people that want
Yes.
to go because
Okay.
we're over time right now. So anybody that feels like they want to sign off, just remember, we're going to send out the slides and the recorded session. So thank you for your time and attention.
We'll stay for Jeanette and Sadie. Anybody else wants to have this conversation go for a while, but thank you all very much for this. Thank you. Terrific job, Yvonne, as well. Very much so. So Sadie, I'm going to give you this example and Jeanette here as well. In my previous life, so to speak, I was in the medical fields. I was president and CEO of 2 major medical centers. And I remember thinking about an Employee of the Month award.
Mhm.
And we had this box next to the cafeteria of suggestions. And when I opened it up, it was cupcake wrappers. And I realized this was silly and I was going to disband it. And something in me said, don't do that. Ask the employees to create one themselves. They created it. It was fantastic. all I said was before someone gets the monthly award, make sure that HR is not disciplining them or they're going to have to be fired. And we were very fortunate to have a member of our board who owned a minor league baseball team that is now a AA team for the Yankees. And we then had the annual employee award meeting, invited the entire board and all members of management and all the 12 nominees. Each one got their name on the back of a baseball jersey with a number 1 for January, 12 for December. When the award was won for who was the employee of the year, the satisfaction that I had was amazing, just watching the other person glow in a pride, glow in appreciation, glow and just recognition. And so I've learned about belonging, a long time ago in my career. And I think it's incumbent upon all of you to teach people in leadership what they need to do between you and me. I would encourage it. I would be an advocate for it. I would follow the advice that Yvonne and yourselves and Lisa and all others have here. But I would not let leadership take it over control, because that's never going to work. Never going to work. And take it from a guy like me that's had a lot of success and that before I started the company for 18 years. I think you're on the right track. I think this was a great conversation. I'm just curious, Janet, how did you hear about this webinar?
So actually I get emails. I don't know if I'm on the newsletter.
Yeah, you probably
I
are.
might
Okay.
be. Yes, so that's how I got it. And
I'm just curious. That's
being a
what...
DEI person, I said, I got to jump all over this.
Sadie, how about you, Sadie? How did you get involved with us?
I actually think I'm signed up for the National Council of Mental Health Wellbeing, their
There you go.
newsletter, and I think this was in there.
Yeah, no, we're members of the National Council of Mental Wellbeing, so they promote our webinars. That's one.
Yes,
Okay, good.
that's what it is. Yep.
Anybody else have? Hold on here.
All I can say is I've enjoyed this very, very much. And frankly, I was concerned about the interactive piece because, it was a lot of people that registered and I was like, how are we going to have a conversation? But we managed. So well done, everybody. We got to talk. So
Yeah,
that's
one
my
last thing.
favorite part.
I want to respond to a couple of things here. So those with questions, Ashley, Sarah, etc. You will be receiving the recording and the PowerPoint. I would highly suggest you reach out through us, Yvonne, at Yvonne.Styles@dcm-associates.com. She'll schedule time with you and talk about what she can do on our behalf. I think it's great to have this kind of a discussion. And again, her email will be on the PowerPoint, so you know. We used to just have the first name, but now we have so many people in the group with first names the same. So we'll go Yvonne.Styles@dcm-associates.com. You'll get that. And I would suggest you reach out to Yvonne and have a conversation about how she can help you in your organization. You see how good she is. She's amazing, 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 amazing. She's more amazing. I mean, I'm impressed every day on what Yvonne. She's incredible.
And of course, I pay him for that.
Absolutely. Anyway, Jeanette, thank you. Lisa, thank you.
Thank you.
Sadie,
What a
thank you.
great conversation. Dennis, thank you so much. Dennis is like so generous with his experience. So please don't hesitate to reach out to him as well. He's 35 years in leadership. So, and of course we do a lot of what I talked about in terms of retention and attracting talent. We do executive search. We know what it's like out there trying to find talent. So
we develop our firm recruits leaders, but obviously develops leaders. So we'll be in touch with you more about that. But thank you, Janet, Sadie, and Lisa.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and attention.
And Yvonne, I'll circle back with you in 2 seconds.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone. Be well, stay safe. Happy Black History Month.